Today I am starting a series on beginner cooking, and I have a genuine beginner for this episode. This is my nephew Toby. He's 16. He's kind of an absent-minded professor. He's the kind of person who can do really complicated math in his head but didn't know how to turn on the stove till he was about 10. So you know that if he can cook it, it's actually not too terribly hard to learn.
Alright.
Okay, start by turning on the oven to 350 degrees. Do you know how to do that?
I think I turn it counterclockwise.
Preheating the oven ensures that the oven will actually be hot enough when we put the food in there, which helps with consistency. The next thing you want to do is rinse the berries. So just go ahead and rinse them off in the sink, and then set the in the container, and then set the whole container in the bottom of the sink to drain while we work on the rest.
Aha.
If you rinse them too early, they tend to get mushy. So you want to rinse off all of the pesticides and dirt, but you want to do it right before you use them. So the next thing, I think, according to recipes, you want to take your butter, measure out 4 tablespoons, and put it in this pan. It's an 8x8 pan. This is obviously not actually 8x8, but it's roughly the same volume. Okay, do you know how to measure butter?
Well, where do I find the tablespoon?
Well, it's actually easier than that with butter.
Whoa!
Printed right here on the wrapper are tablespoon increments.
How have I never seen that before? I use butter all the time.
Well, maybe you never cared how many tablespoons you were using before. So cut it off at 4 tablespoons.
Which is roughly half. Oh, exactly half.
Exactly half.
Does it just sit there?
Yes, you're now going to put it in the oven to melt.
Mount Doom.
And while that's melting, we're going to make the cobbler mixture. So start with 3/4 of a cup of flour. We're using a regular unbleached all-purpose flour for this. I've also used a flour that I keep on hand, which is white flour plus wheat germ.
How much of this am I supposed to use?
3/4 of a cup.
3/4.
I actually have a 3/4 of a cup measure. Otherwise, you would obviously use 1/2 of a cup plus 1/4 of a cup. There's a precise, particular way to measure flour, but really when you're a beginner, and especially when you're making something like cobbler, it doesn't really matter that much. Just make sure that you don't pack it down too much as you're measuring. Measure, level, dump in.
Put it in here?
Yep. And then to the flour, you're going to add 3/4 of a cup of sugar. I'm using a turbinado sugar. You can also just use white sugar if that's what you have on hand. That's fine. What else do we need according to the recipe, Toby?
It says baking powder. Somebody added a space between the pow and the der.
How much?
1 teaspoon. We have here the baking powder. You add, you chip off one.
Normally comes in powder. My baking powder comes as a baking rock. There. This is not actually, or shouldn't be part of baking. I can do that part. Right. And that's leveled off flat. I think there are some lumps still in that baking powder. So what I would do is just kind of dump it in your hand and smush out the lumps as you drop it in the bowl.
My hand.
Well, they're clean, right?
Yeah.
Alright, oh, my next cooking tip, don't leave the rest of the stick of butter on top of your hot oven because it'll start to melt eventually.
Oh, and salt. 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt. What I really hate is those recipes where it's like a pinch of salt, because I have enormously huge hands, so it's like my pinches are much larger than other people's pinches. So it doesn't really make sense.
So then you want to whisk that together.
It also says to add milk.
You want to whisk it first before you add milk, though.
Ah.
The reason for that is if you stir the baking powder in with the liquid ingredients, sometimes it does not get as thoroughly mixed, and then you have parts that taste like baking powder and other parts that don't rise, and this is not optimal.
Like that word, optimal.
One does not desire suboptimal cobbler. Yeah, pretty much if it looks mixed, it's mixed. Sometimes if it's just flour and baking powder, you can have a hard time telling when it's mixed. So you might want to give it a couple extra stirs in case like that. But in this case, you can tell that you could taste it if you wanted to.
Will it taste good?
Probably not. Do you want to know how much milk?
Does it say here?
It does, in the ingredient list.
3/4 of a cup. Here we have a 3/4 of a cup measure. We pour the milk into it. And pour that into the batter.
Now at this point, you want to mix it as little as possible while still not having any dramatically unmixed portions.
It says whisk to form a smooth batter.
But what you do not want to do for a recipe like this is mix it so long that you begin developing the gluten in the flour, because then you will have tough cobbler. So you want to mix it just long enough to get all the flour mixed in and not have any big lumps, but not any longer, or at least not much longer than that. A stirring technique that's often used is a circular motion. That looks pretty well mixed. You want to just kind of scrape along the bottom and make sure that you don't have any flour pockets, because sometimes the flour will just kind of hide from you.
Is that like underground pockets of noxious gas?
It is kind of like that, yeah. If you're not finding any pockets of flour, we can proceed.
Does that mean I lost?
No, that means you won. There were no pockets of flour.
Yay.
That's good.
I feel
All
so
right.
accomplished.
So at this point, you want a oven mitt or a hot pad to remove from the oven the melted butter.
Got this huge surgical oven mitt. It's alive! It's not really alive. It's okay. Alright, so now what do we do?
Now we will pour this into the pan. You may want a rubber spatula to get all of the batter out.
You may want a rubber spatula to get all the batter out. Contrary to popular belief, rubber spatulas are not entirely made out of rubber. Their handles are usually wooden.
Thanks for clarifying that, Toby.
I always like to add a little fun trivia facts. So is that it?
Well, would you like me to scrape out the bowl? I don't have to.
Is that like the boring part? Whoa.
There's more in there.
That was
see?
fast and efficient.
Practice. Practice. Alright, so now we put the fruit in. Those blackberries that you rinsed earlier?
Oh, is that what those were for? I thought those were snacks for while we were cooking.
So now sprinkle those on top. The original recipe calls for this much cobbler with twice as much fruit, but I always like to have extra cobbler. Many people enjoy it better that way. Not Toby. He likes lots of fruit with his cobbler. So if you like, you can double the fruit with this recipe. But we are using 6 ounces of blackberries. And this works with any kind of berry. You can also use some frozen fruits like peaches, or fresh fruits for that matter, if you want to cut them up.
Well, that wasn't so hard. Cobbler done now?
Now we put it in the oven, and we wait for about an hour.
Wait, what? Go back from whence you came.
You want to put it about in the middle of the oven. If you put it right next to... Go ahead. If you put it right next to a wall, it'll heat less evenly than if there's good air circulation on all sides.
It's all about physics. Physics, people. Physics. It is time for the extraction.
Alright, it has been about 55 minutes, I think? I meant to check it at 50 minutes, but I forgot. I should have set a timer. Set a timer. set a
Pro
timer
tip.
that's important. Otherwise, you forget to check stuff. All right, so go ahead and remove the cobbler.
It smells like food.
That is a good sign. All right.
Should I turn off the oven?
Well, first let's test it and make sure it's done. It definitely looks done. Possibly even just a little darker on the edges than it needs to be. Take this toothpick and insert it.
Pick my key?
No. Insert it into the middle of the cobbler.
Does it have to be the exact center?
No, just roughly somewhere in the middle, not along an edge. And then pull it out. Are there any, is there any liquid or large crumbs stuck to the toothpick?
There's some fruit juice.
Okay, that's fine. We don't want the fruit to be completely dehydrated. What we want is to make sure that the cobbler is not still running.
It's not.
Okay. Then we're done.
I have a question.
Yes.
How is it that we put the cobbler on the bottom, but now it's on the top?
The fruit sinks to the bottom during the cooking process.
No. It's magic.
So you just made cobbler. How do you feel?
I feel like a normal human being, which is not normal for me, actually.
Now you can turn off the oven.
Well, this has been Good Bad Food.
Thanks for watching.